When your struggles are diluted down and they are told from someone else's perspective, it is a principally unjust way of representing someone, and we were very proud to oppose that on opening government. A key thing is on setup, and I'll spend some time on this. First thing, who is this minority writer? I think this writer is likely to be from the vast majority of these writers from minority communities, and the likely reasons for this is that this writer is maybe struggling or is maybe on the verge of fame is because of marginalization that is obviously true on either side of the house. What are the reasons for marginalization? Firstly, socioeconomic barriers have prevented this writer from even entering the mainstream narratives. This means that this writer maybe would have gained success a lot earlier. So that does not mean that success is a metric because this writer is good, but they could not gain that because they had to suffer through marginalization and socioeconomic barriers. But secondly, marginalization is unfair and principally unjust because it is an unfair world that pushes these people out of these mainstream narratives, and they're never able to access the same opportunities as other writers who are not minority writers. So it just means that it's principally better for this writer to gain something which is likely to grant them success, which is going to be a certain impact, but also stability in money and stuff like that. Thirdly, it's just principally bad because of birth lottery. You did not choose to be born as a minority writer, so it's obviously true that you have if there is an epistemic access to this person, it means that they most probably want to gain success, fame, push their family out of these poverty lines and gain upward social mobility, and that's the kind of profit and the kinds of success they would want to gain for their family. There's some reasons for why most marginalized people on either side of the house will have this incentive. Then, who is this minority writer, and some more framing on that? I think they specifically have their needs that have to be met because of monetary incentives, because of their family, because they have to put food on the table, because they have to have a roof over your head, but also specifically because of all the reasons I gave you on marginalization. There's an active, a narrative against you, and you need to survive against the basic needs. So the world is unfair, and you need to prioritize your family and your needs and your monetary incentives and put food on the table. That's your prioritization as a minority writer. But secondly, we're even willing to take the trade-off of you having cathartic value just by writing this, and that's going to be a second thing, and that's you as an individual level that you have as a writer. But first thing, let's just prove what does this depiction look like. I think, and I'm going to be comparative here. Firstly, the direct victim is likely to be specifically the victim's anthology, their research, or specifically the kinds of depictions that you can gain through multiple variety or sources of text, right? There are religious sources, texts of the direct victim. You can maybe interview the victim if they're comfortable with it. You can consent to it. Obviously, consent is a part of this debate, but also specifically the writer can use anonymity as an example to depict that person within those books and stuff like that. But also they can be articles, short form words and stuff like that. So there are multiple plethoras of ways that you can depict this direct victim, and you can access the kind of knowledge that they have to interviewing them or assessing them and stuff like that. But oftentimes these struggles are interlinked with a lot of other people within the minority that are suffering. So it just means that it's not a new thing. It's a thing that has already existed in the history of anthropology and the history of marginalized communities. It's just that you need to depict that specific thing as a writer and maybe sell that up because that's your incentive within that actor motion that we're presenting on opening government. And just some caveats here again, right? So if Op Bench wants to say, there'll be fucking gory depictions and you'll just do stupid shit. No, there are two things, right? Firstly, there's a massive audience for this as well, so people like to read that stuff as well. But secondly, trigger warnings can also be given, and there's also anonymity that can be given. So it's likely good depictions that are depicted in actual ways, but there's also honesty attached to it that's not going to exist on the comparative. Because what is the comparative? I just want to note that in an observer depiction, the truthfulness of these struggles is likely to be vague. It's likely to be challenged. It's likely to be just made on sensationalization and trivialization of this. There are multiple reasons for this. Because a simple intuition point for this is how screenwriters depict graphic violence on minorities in media shows such as Kinder's List or multiple other shows that depict these graphic violence. The tendency for these people to depict that from an observer's or a third person perspective is only to sensationalize it just so they can get some amount of monetary value from it from other perspectives. But also this writer specifically will be harmed by it because maybe they're also a minority writer, right? But if you're writing something bad about people from other minorities, you will obviously likely feel bad about it because you are depicting and you're adding to the kinds of mainstream narratives that are against your minorities. That is the cathartic harm that exists onto you, and that's going to be a second thing on this harm that we'll have on this. Then some more reasons for depictions on observers, right? I think specifically the trivialization of this is likely to also be true because there's lesser research that is incentivized when there's an observer depiction. Because what that means is that you can likely just like metaphorize it, or like maybe do from a third person perspective, and nobody really cares about it. Because you are the writer who's setting that narrative in your book, right? And that specifically means that you can choose whichever observer this is, or like what kind of person this can be a rich person looking down at a minority, and you can maybe sell a book on that, or maybe this can be like someone from a elitist perspective or stuff like that, looking down on other minorities and stuff. And the reason for this is also because this sells, right? You're like pushing for this into like majority communities, you try to gain profit out of them, but the reason for this is like this will not give you money, and that's what we want to project on the monetary flip. The saturation point of you already competing with other like majority writers is so much that there needs to be some unique aspect for you as a minority writer to gain. So that unique aspect is gained when there's a direct victim that you can actually depict within your books, and that uniqueness is unlocked on the comparative on opening government when you're able to depict those things. But the comparative is not unlocked on their side because the observers are likely just going to be very vague, or just going to be like only selling them for some kind of monetary value that you have, which is likely to be just be on the comparative. Do you have a comparative?
So this is a weird strategy. If you frame that money is the most important and then say we make more money and that is bad, that's obviously going against your case.
No, I said money is the most important thing, and I said that is a unique aspect through which you can make more money. This is an actor motion, guys. Like your incentive analysis that the field is already saturated, there are multiple majority writers you're already competing with, but also on an individual level, you will feel bad as a minority writer because you're adding onto the mainstream narratives that are pushing against your minorities and are harming your minorities. So that just means on an individual level, you're so fucked up that you will be bad. Why is this individual level and bad when why this cathartic value so bad? Because I think like writing is a very tough job, right? You need to also cater to a lot of publishing houses. You need to also run through a lot of publishers. You need to constantly motivate yourself every single day to wake up and actually write about things, because there are writer blogs, creative blogs that multiple creative artists and visual artists and media artists go through. And also like specifically the motivation to write something also has to come inherently to you and intrinsically to you, and that has to be like uniform so that you're able to complete that book in time and able to give that to the publisher. If you're able to prove to you that you're able to complete this because the passion and the motivation for you is more because of the cathartic value that you gain out of writing as a minority writer, that's a much more significant benefit because you're able to complete that book but also gain the monetary benefits of having a successful book that is able to actually go out and come out and actually become something big. Because notice, the certainty of this debate is likely to be very vague and teams will be very muddy about this. But the speculativeness dials down on opening government when you prove to you that the certainty of monetary value matters more. Why the book is that matters more because you get a cathartic and motivational value as a minority writer, but also specifically you're able to gain more profits, thereby leading to all the impacts. Very proud of opening government.
Thank you for that speech. To continue the debate, I call you up.
Or we'll win this debate in two ways. The first is explaining why at least you're able to get opt-in, so for instance, money and a lot of people buying your books, and secondly, why you get backlash from minority communities, which goes against the catharsis claim because you feel like you're actively betraying the community. Before that, a few points of framing. The first is that you you have fiat, right? So you can choose specific analysis or choose specific ways in which observers are able to observe it and when you write it, right? Like for instance, if you're African American, you probably still have, for instance, white friends, right? So it means that you are able to take into their own account so that you're able to make sure that it's not as sensationalized, they don't explain this. But secondly, these authors are smart. I'm not sure as to why they're going to make it extremely vague, right? In order for a book to sell, it needs to be very illustrative, it needs to be very selling, which is why a lot of people opt into it. So it needs to be at least detailed to some extent and allows for people to opt into it, rather than just it being vague, so I don't get their claim coming from their studied house. But third and last thing here is that they say it's not going to be super gory, and then they say there's trigger warnings. Like obviously, if there are trigger warnings, that still dissuades a lot of people from opting into it because they are things like, for instance, averse to pain, they don't want to experience suffering and stuff like that. They have stuff like religious beliefs that don't want them to be able to watch these types of stuff, and etc. But what we want to explain is that the observer perspective is likely going to look like two things. The first is that it's more broad, right? So it's not just direct victim of, for instance, if you're not having access to gay marriage, but the broad community of gay individuals that probably do not have, for instance, their own communities, that they are rejected, etc. And you as a friend, it's shown in the perspective as a friend. So it's you being shy and scared about why your gay friend isn't talking to you, why they're mad about you about, for instance, you making the joke that they made. So it feels a lot of emphasis towards these observers. So for instance, the amount of pain that they inflicted, or for instance, them seeing their own friend concerned and why that is a bad significant harm. The first thing I want to explain here is that why is there already a trend of individuals already doing the victim perspective for two reasons. One, let's use their mechanism. It's sensationalization. A lot of minority writers already do a lot of these victim perspectives in the first place. But secondly, there are always stereotypes of publishers that force you to be able to do things like minority perspectives, so you saying your own direct lived experience and therefore opting into it. But the third and last thing here is that you do have subtle pressure from your own community that tell you that you need to show your own individual experience, don't talk about any other individuals, etc. What these sets of framing does is two things. The first is that you are already adding onto the block, and you're just a minority writer, which means that you're competing against other minority writers within that own region because they're already doing that single perspective. The second thing here is that there's literally lack of perspectives in the observer perspective, so at least you're able to take that advantage point because a lot of people don't necessarily opt into it as other minority writers, which is why you're able to take that advantage selling point and therefore opt into it. Let's then go ahead and frame out catharsis. One, they don't explain as to why you can't get catharsis on our side. If you're still depicting, for instance, your minority community, perhaps you can still get some level of catharsis because you're still showing their pain. The second thing here is that if people don't like it, you feel like you're actively betraying their own community, and therefore you will still feel bad, you still feel rejected, and you still feel like you're going against your own community. First push, why people are able to opt in and buy your books. This is important because money is often the most proximate benefit to you as an individual, right? You oftentimes want to be able to make ends of like month's ends, for instance, being able to pay rent or being able to pay for your family. I don't get why this is Gov's push. Why then are you able to get this for 5 reasons? The first is that people are averse to suffering. In order to make it, for instance, a direct victim perspective, often it's either it might need to be gory, or for instance, it's experiences to which suffering that these individuals do not properly experience. So for instance, trans individuals have to go through depression because they feel a lot of gender dysphoria. Often a lot of people don't opt into it precisely for the reason that it's very gory in the types of illustrations and depictions and the wording that they do in terms of, for instance, gender transition surgery. But the second thing here is that it is more relatable. On the observer perspective, at least you are showing it in the perspective of other individuals outside of that community. So they show the experience of, for instance, you like feeling weirded out about why your friend isn't talking to you that comes from a minority community. Versus on their side of the house, if you're, for instance, African American and you show the depictions of, for instance, police brutality in the perspective of the victim, often observers don't necessarily relate to you as much. They don't see it as much as significant harm. Or moreover, they just don't buy your books, right? Because they feel like it's obligated for that own individual community and they feel like they're overstepping their own boundaries. This is not a debate about whether or not you're able to get, like, for instance, Republicans or conservatives to split towards you, but it's already allies or people in defense, and therefore you want to be able to make them opt in instead of making them feeling outed, instead of saying like something like, oh, you shouldn't like read this book because you're not this minority community in the first place. The third thing here is that we're willing to take the trade-off of the emphasis, right? Because on their side of the house, a lot of these observers that do opt into it already feel burdened, right? If there's a lot of illustrative detail about the experiences of these direct victims, they feel like this is hopeless. They feel like there's a lot of despair, that the stereotype and the structure that is currently existing doesn't work so far. As opposed to observer's perspective, at least it's the micro, for instance, interactions that they can deal with, i.e. interacting with your friends, how you can help them out even if their family rejects them, which is a lot more easier for individuals to believe in and allow them to be able to opt into. But the fourth and last thing then is that when you show the observer perspective, it shows that it also affects them as well. So it's, for instance, husbands of wives who couldn't get, for instance, the gender pay gap, which means that they don't get as much economic productivity. Or, for instance, your friend actively feeling like you're betraying you, which is why these people have now the incentive to be able to help, or, for instance, opt into this book, precisely for the reason that they now feel affected towards it. Versus on government, they don't feel as much directly affected towards it or indirectly affected towards it, because the emphasis on that direct victim means that you shouldn't overstep your boundaries to that significant extent. The fifth and last thing here is that this is the unique selling point of this. This is the only advantage point that you can go against other minority writers so that you are able to buy, for instance, your book, etc. The impacts of this are twofold. One, you just get the immense amount of money, even if it's not a lot of money, at least you're able to get money from, for instance, your friends or people who are allies or people who are in the middle because they feel like feel cathartic towards your own community. But the second thing here is that this is for people who are allies already. Under their side of the house, they don't want to feel performative. They don't want to seem like they're overstepping the social movement, and therefore they never opt into it in their side of the house. Before I go on, OG.
If opening opposition's USP is great, like gory depiction, then obviously the research that you put into having a direct victim is obviously more unique values. It means that it flips the monetary claim, but also it's not a representation of bad community, it represents the actual community's violence. So it's more research put into it.
So this is just one response to one of the mechanisms. We give you 4 other mechanisms towards that. But secondly, you're just a minority writer. How are you going to get research, right? Second argument, what? You get backlash from the minority communities. This is important because insofar as you feel regret and insofar as you feel hated by your minority community, any type of catharsis is meaningless, right? You feel like you're going against it and etc. There are 2 reasons why. First, when it's you're a minority writer, right? So oftentimes when you show the perspective of the direct victim, you show your own lived experience, which is bad because it means that you oftentimes have to either generalize it to the broad sense of communities, or the in the sense that it's too specific to your own specific niche, which therefore means that other minority communities, so for instance, your other gay individuals, often say that this is not representative of my own ideal, as for instance, a trans individual, and therefore go against you. But the second thing here is that it invalidates other perspectives, right? Because you're showing the direct victim perspective, you have to lose a lot of opportunity costs in terms of covering other stories, which is why a lot of people oftentimes go against you. The comparative on our side, and the observer perspective, is that even though it is broad, that is okay, because it means that people still feel connected towards it, that at least they're still experiencing the harm of, for instance, like rejection and betrayal, which is a lot easier for individuals to feel more connected to on our side of the house, and it's what connects the community together, so it doesn't let your family members or, for instance, your friends get mad at you, because they still feel like they're being represented on their side of the house. This is important, because even if, for instance, it is showing your own lived experience, that does not matter when your friends tell you that you are invalid, that you're going against the community, and therefore your experiences are no longer mattering. Very proud to oppose.
Yes, there was a speech. This is a debate. I call DP here.
Yatharth going as deputy. Starting speech in 3, 2, 1. 3 things in this debate. First, I'll go and explain as to why you can probably get any kind of fame on material benefits like money, and why it's important. Second, why is this going to be cathartic for you, and why is that the more important thing? And third, I'm going to respond to and take them out because the case is just uncomparative. Firstly, let's talk about what this minority right looks like. I think why does he need fame and why does he need catharsis are two different things. One is that why does one become a minority writer of all things? Man, probably you could become a fantasy writer, you could choose any other career. So the specific reason you would opt into this career. What is that reason? One, you've probably seen a lot of struggle and pain yourself. What this means is you've probably lost opportunities, you've lost people because of people discriminating against you. You've been a victim of violence from generations by the state, by other people who think you are inferior than you, or you think that you are probably less than them. What this means is you probably got bullied in school, you probably did not get picked up in your debate team, you probably did not lose out on educational opportunities or opportunities for your career. That means, secondly, the amount of people who are able to become this writer are also low in number. Probably anyone can become a writer in general, but in order for you to be a minority writer, you probably had comparatively better access than general minorities, but you still struggled a lot. That means the number of people who can become a writer are inherently lower in the first place. But then firstly, let's talk about why is this going to be cathartic to you. Multiple reasons for this. Firstly, you are able to raise awareness because of which you get validation both internally and externally. How does this happen? People read up what you say and believe that, oh, this is probably a struggle which you probably had. That means they understand what you are going through. So you think that people don't know what the struggle is, and people don't just go into a narrative which is against you, because there's active narratives against minorities which exist in status quo by the conservative people. That means you have won the best shot at creating awareness and telling your story. But secondly, you now go ahead and say that even if the book is not the bestseller, you now internally validate yourself because you know that what you wrote is good, is the reality. So you know there's a piece of story out there which is real, which is not falsifying what the reality is, which is not lying to the people about what the minority struggles is. What this means is even if general critique exists about this exists for all kinds of books regardless. What specifically happens here is one, the amount of critique you can have on a book which is from the victim's perspective is already lesser because it's a sensationalized thing. If you got in backlash on people who are probably from minority, in this liberal space, you probably get even more backlash. So people don't think that, oh, I should just go ahead and call out this minority writer because they're writing something just because I want to. That means you don't have a lot of people just saying that, oh, you're writing bullshit, you should not stop this. So this amount of backlash in general is not that high. But secondly, you have the ability to call out and ask for change. And this asking for change is extremely important because this is an extremely effective way for you to ask for change, because art is what connects with people. Art and writing is what people read up and empathize with. If they read things which probably were real, they believe it. This is not true for generally anything. If I just go ahead and say things, people will say, oh, it's at face value. But I explain them. I tell them a story of what is happening, why I I struggled, how I was bullied, and it was not my fault, and how it affected me, how it affected my mental health. That's what people relate to. You can now ask for change because now you tell people what the reality is. You have the ability to make them empathize with you and therefore get things done. What this secondly does is empowers you. Why? Because you as a minority person never had the ability to control the narrative, because majority always control the narrative. They were the one telling the story. They were the one saying that, oh, we are probably not bad because we are the ones who are the victims. Minorities came here and took our spaces away. That means you now are empowered because you have the ability to go ahead and explain and control the narrative for once in your life. What this means and why is this not going to be cathartic on the comparative side? One, because you will have to tone down on your reality, because if you're explaining things from an observer's point of view, you will have to go ahead and say, oh, probably what the minority is feeling is biased and is not true, probably because observer is likely from the other community, they already have biases with their community, so you probably have to tone down on your experiences, so you're not able to tell the real story. And this is exactly what irritates you, because you always look down and were irritated that, oh, why are they not telling the full story, why they're not telling the real story. You want to actively go ahead and portray the real story, you do not tone down the reality at all the time. But secondly, you won't be able to control the narrative, which is extremely important for you as a person. At that point in time, you think that, oh, why are you different than, let's say, another writer who's probably working for the majority or is not helping the community. That means an internal dissonance which exists for you, because of which you can't really go ahead and work out on this regardless. But then secondly, let's talk about why is it going to be materially good. Before that, I take a BF from closing. Do you have anything?
Would it be dissonance if you're still representing struggles of your community?
Because you have to tone down what you're saying, because you have to now go ahead and take into account of factors which are probably not of your community. You have to be an observer who might not know the reality. That means you will say things that, oh, probably the community is not struggling that well. You have to tone down the impact and the way you did things or the way the community felt, because the other person cannot understand the reality because they're not a minority. You always thought that, oh, the other people cannot understand what I'm probably feeling because they don't understand what I'm doing and they've never been here. This specific position you have is important for you because this is exactly what you want to go ahead and say at all points in time. Let's talk about why is it going to be materially good at all points in time. One, the market wants minority content and liberal population is rising. That means students taking higher number, having higher protests. They want to go ahead and engage in this content. They want this content to embrace more and therefore opt into this. But secondly, it's also perceptively good for everyone to care about minorities. They want people to go ahead and think, oh, this is content about minorities. We should probably look into this. But secondly, why is this victim's perspective especially here? Because one, publishers want this. Markets want content which can be sensationalized. If it has gory stuff, it's alright, because there are enough people who want to read gory stuff. If you will read gory stuff in Game of Thrones, they're happy to read it here as well, because that's what, if it's interesting enough, if it's new enough, it's okay. But secondly, market is saturated in terms of observer ideas, because everyone could be an observer, anyone could write a book from the observer's point of view, but you have this unique ability to write it from the victim's point of view, which is why your unique selling point. What this means is that you have an edge over other writers. One, because publishers now prioritize you here, because you are especially in a situation which is rare and you can portray a story which can be sensationalized, people can be empathetic. That means the book has had high likelihood of success. But secondly, the victim's POV is what is needed at one time to go ahead and sell things. The comparative here is you don't have any special empathetic edge for you. But secondly, you don't have publishers coming in to go ahead and give you what you want. Why is catharsis so damn important? Three reasons for this. One is on mental sanctity, because you want to have no mental dissonance. You want to go ahead and portray the reality as it is at all points in time. But secondly, it's also retribution. You want to give things back. You want to take things back and get justice and show the reality to get a chance of change. Why is money so important on weighing? One, you have the best chance of social mobility at point in time. That means you can't and this is social mobility without betraying your own community. That means you can probably move up the ladder, you can get fame and money and not betray your community and not tone down. Secondly, you have your struggles and reasons for you are in your control about what you're saying. Let's take out O here as well. Because O says minority backlash. Two reasons why it will not happen. One, because minorities are a lot more closely knit with you. So your success is something they want to go ahead and engage with. But secondly, even if it's a struggle, the number of people who are opting into this is always higher. They want to go ahead and portray their struggles. So if you're portraying the reality, they will opt into this. But secondly, at all points in time, people want to opt into things which are about minorities. Therefore, they will. For all those reasons.
Next to Octo, we have the apple yellow.
Government has a simplistic view of this motion. They assume that a minority will write a book, let it out to the public, and they will get empathy because of it. It is PM himself who tells you that these are people who have targets on their backs, these are people who are marginalized, these are people who are subject to more competition, to more hardships than the average writer. I'm not sure whether they will get automatic empathy, but they will get automatic understanding on their side, especially when they write about what they are expected to write about. The first thing I'll do is weigh the money claim coming from them. There are several things you want to note under this. One, the opt-in that Jacob gives you is a clear process of the art being made, of the art being consumed by the general public, and the art giving you a return because of the general audience that you're selling it to, so you can sell it to more people on our side, so that's better on scale. Two, it's a lot faster. Because there's a larger pool of people entering, you do not have to rely on a certain audience buying. If it's just the minorities, for example, or just your community who wants to buy your stuff in government side, when they do not have the money, when they are hit by a crisis, they cannot buy your books. Three, government claims that this is their win condition, but they trade it off quite a lot if you actually listen to them. Look at their language. They say, even if you don't get a big audience, even if you get backlash, for example, and the book is not as successful, so I'm not sure how important money is actually on their side. But lastly, this is a response to saying that anyone can do it and anyone can give you the perspective that we want, for example, in the observer side. But one, you are still a minority, so there's still a unique form of writing that you have, a unique form of, a unique selling point, for example, that you have as a minority who can give a different perspective, for example, on the same conflict. But two, when you take an observer perspective, it's precisely because it's broader that you can take a lot of different angles, or you can talk about a lot of different things. So even if the current thing that you're writing about is not working out, there is a lot of space for you to adjust to current trends. There is a lot of space for you to adjust, for example, to a different perspective or to a different audience if that's what you want to cater to, because it's becoming harder for you or because competition is getting to you on our side. On their side, it's very hard because you're pigeonholing yourself to just one perspective, to just one expectation of what you should write about, and that's precisely why it's bad for money. It's also bad for catharsis, as I'll explain. PY.
Opening opposition's reasons are asserted. Why does the minority community want to have the observer perspective over the direct victim perspective? There have to be some reasons for it. The reasoning is there is much more actual representation on opening government versus no reason for their side to have community opt-in.
But we explained to you that when you create a perspective that's purely your own and your own experiences only, that means it's also hard for the other people around you to relate to that as well. Because you're only talking about what you went through when there are a lot of other different victims in that conflict as well. So even if that's what your community wants, it's what makes other communities angry, and that's precisely why you get backlash on their side. The extension I want to give you then is on catharsis. Why is it more likely that you get this on our side if that's what you want to talk about in DPM, so discussions with them? This is the assured impact because of how direct it is to the actor. There are several things I want you to note. One, on the process of writing about observers, it's already cathartic. So even if you don't get the book out, even if you don't necessarily get the success, for example, this is already good for you as a writer. Why? You likely want to collect enough information to make a good enough assumption of what different people feel about the conflict, precisely because you are not the observer, for example, because you are a victim. So you want to get the perspectives of observers, you want to talk to a lot more people to get an accurate enough representation of what you want to write about. And it's not likely to be untrue because PM already tells you that there's an okay amount of people reading it. They can probably call you out on it if it's not true. What the trade-off will take is that it's likely to be not as deep, it's likely to be not as investigative to one specific community, and that's okay, as I'll explain to you later on. It's untrue then on government because it is your struggle that you already know, you already feel it, so you already went through it yourself. You are unlikely to talk to more people about it before you write it. You're unlikely to get other perspectives on it before you write it and publish it. So what happens on our side? Three things. One, you engage with more people, like what Jacob explains, because you're also surrounded by a community that is not just your own minority, for example. People who are also probably of different races, probably of also different genders, who are also affected by this conflict that you talk to more so that you can get an accurate representation of what you want to write about. This is good for catharsis because in the future you could probably find more things to write about because you have more inspiration by talking to more people, or you just get a better view of the world, for example. But two, you get a more holistic view of the conflict. It's the intersectionality of issues that Jacob explains. It's not just you who's affected. There's probably a lot of other people who are affected of it as well. So it makes you get a broader view of the conflict and a broader view of the world in general. But lastly, you create more discourse around the conflict and struggle in general. You get to discover more about yourself the more you talk about it with other people. All this proves then that there is no dissonance because you have that information and you have the resources to get that information. You still feel qualified enough to write about it because you're still talking to these people. Even if it's not formal research, you are still able to make these conversations. conversations. But the second thing you're able to do, and why this gets you catharsis, is that you're going against the stereotypes that Jacob explains. What Jacob says is that because you are a minority, you are expected to write about certain topics, you're expected to write in a certain way, through a certain perspective, and government does exactly that. Even if in our side, it is a little harder to probably get a publisher at the start because you believe OG in saying that it's oversaturated and that there is competition, it is still comparatively easier to get a publisher than it is to switch publishers on their side when you decide that this is not the perspective you want to take anymore, that you do not want to be just the minority anymore, and you want to write about other things, for example, or you want to shift the perspective that you're writing about. This is important because a minority writer is still allowed to write about other things, they're still allowed to make their career better, for example, in the future, and have a sustainability for that career. You probably don't want to just write about the conflict as you grow in the profession. So what happens in government is that you accept that pigeonhole and you only write about the stereotypes that Jacob explains. So you seek out a publisher on the basis of saying that your only selling point is the minority perspective. They already say it themselves. What we want is minority content. If that is what the content you want to put out, it's very hard to adjust from that. But two, it's very hard to opt out once you do it on their side because there's already the perception of association that you associate with this certain publisher or this certain writer and you cannot necessarily opt out. There's a lot of legal barriers like contracts, for example, agreements, NDAs that make it so it's probably hard for you to opt out of that as well. It also affects your writing because if you are a publisher with, if you are under a publisher, for example, with specific rules against graphic language or whatever, that makes it hard for you to adjust. This is what makes it hard for you to control the narrative. It's not true on their side that they get to control the narrative just because you're writing about your feelings. Because if you want to make it big, if they want money on their side that like what they explain, then it's very hard to go through all of these legal mechanisms, to go through all of these business mechanisms to make it so that they still get that. At the very end of this issue then, how do we want to weigh this? One, what you get on our side is the long term of that catharsis because you're able to talk to more people, you're able to widen your perspectives, and you're able to create more content that relates to a lot more people, which obviously helps you as a writer as well because you want to be able to view the world more broader. And this is important to you because of that catharsis. But secondly, catharsis doesn't exist in isolation. Even if you feel good about it right now, if the people around you tell you that they hate you because of it, which is what Jacob already explains, you will also feel bad about it in the future. So you burn a lot more relationships and you create a lot more dissonance on their side.
Okay, we give a speech now to open the closing half. May I comment or not?
Whose is this?
Who's one there?
Yours?
No, it's there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there's an item.
First, let's outframe opening half. Number one, they never explain why income is the most important thing. In a lot of instances, people who write stuff, by the way, we don't know what this writer is writing, write it as a side job. This means I can maintain a blog, I can write a book over next 2-3 years before I go to publish it. This is not something I have to work on 24/7. This might not necessarily be my primary source of income. This might be something that is just my hobby. I might have a part-time job which I'm getting money from, or I might have a full-time job as a writer where I'm like maybe writing for the Daily Bugle in the Spider-Man movies, and like writing a book about the minority communities is something that I just do when I get home. This means even if you get more opt-in on their side and you get more money out of it, it's not necessarily true that this more money is more important to you. As long as we're able to prove to you that on our side you still get community support and that community support is more important than the money, we are better off. But the second thing is, let's opt into their best case. Majorities do read a lot of majority stuff, and it's not that there is a market for minority material. This necessarily means that majorities are going to read stuff that are written by majority people because they don't want to feel guilty about the perspectives of minorities. This is the best opt case. What are the two most important things in this debate then? Number one is to answer the question why the community is most important to you. Opening government does hint at some things by saying that your community accepts you more, but they never explain why this is the most important thing. The second thing we're going to talk to you about is how you actually end up becoming a writer, which is about your lived experiences since you've grown up. Why is your community the most important thing to you? Two things here. Number one is that even in the best case of AUD, these are probably the only people who read your stuff. This means this becomes more so important to you ever that your community accepts you. Because if it's only that 10,000 people are buying your book, it's only these minorities that do so and not necessarily the majorities. On their side, majorities might buy more, but that's not necessarily like empirical reason for why this will be a certain thing. On our side, minorities do opt into this because they want inspirational stories. They want to read things from their perspectives. When their entire lives, they have read stories from the perspective of European colonizers that have whitewashed their views. They want to read something that is their own. So even if you just sell 10,000 copies of your book, that is fine on our side. You still access monetary benefits and emotional benefits from this community when this community supports you. The second reason this community is the most important to you is because it's the community that can give access to you if you're not the victim of an intersectional issue that you're writing about. Opening opposition never explains why you will be good at writing intersectional views. I'll get on to that later, but in a lot of instances, you might not be the direct victim of the crime that you're talking about. It might be your ancestors. How do you get access to this knowledge? It is through your community. Closing opposition will probably say that, well, on their side, you never have to have access to these people because you write as an observer. But the problem with that is, on their side, the best case is that only the minority reads and listens to you. This means the best case is where the minority is reading the experiences and telling you the stories that you want to write about. The second question to answer is, why is this person probably a writer, or how did they grow up? In most instances, you are a writer because you have read strong, emotional, influential stuff. This means you have read a lot as a child. Or if not that, the best case is that you want to be a writer now. This means you do read a lot of books. The problem is, and this is a concession on opening half, that most of the history and most of the books are written by majorities, are written by white European colonizers who wanted to change histories. This means you read books from the perspective of people who never understood your stories, people who twisted facts in histories. But the problem is, maybe as a child you don't have epistemic access to the fact that, oh, this person is lying about it. But your parents actively tell you that, look, the book you're reading, don't believe it. It's written by some white European piece of shit who did this, who subjected us to torture like 50 years ago. So in most instances, you grow up in a way where you constantly read stuff written by the majorities, but this is stuff, one, that you cannot relate to, which means you earn to have more of this. But second, this is the stuff you're actively told is bad and needs to be changed in the status quo because of your parents. How do you then become a writer if you're a minority and you probably have a lot less resources? It can happen in two ways. Number one is that when your community accepts you and helps you become a writer by giving you the financial support in the beginning stages, by letting you just practice your writing instead of telling you that, oh, you should just become get a tech job and earn a lot of money. They let you do this. This is another reason for why your community is most important to you. But the second is that, let's say they don't accept you in a lot of instances because you want to be a writer. Your parents feel like you're betraying them because you're not trying to earn a lot of money. In these instances, writing about your own communities and their lived experiences is more so important than ever for you so that you can get acceptance within the community in and of itself. This assumes the best case on opposition, which is that this writer does not care about the community. This writer doesn't care about the community because the community doesn't love this writer much. On our side, we are able to prove that you do get more acceptance from the community, which means you're able to build stronger bonds from now onwards. Before that opening.
So you're minimizing the entire debate. If you say minority communities will always opt into you, then that is symmetric on both sides of your frame. What we explained from OO is not just catharsis, but you get opt in from other allies.
So on your side, you already have a lot of shit written by white European colonizers. So minority communities don't have access to the stuff you're writing from your own perspective right now. This opt-in does increase. It's not like they only read 5 books a year and it's only going to be about white European colonizers. They switch to reading more minority written stuff from the victim's perspective. There are 2 questions opening government never answers. The first thing they say is that majorities always told stories, but this felt unjust to you. We answered this question. We tell you exactly why it is that the writer thinks so. The second thing they say is that the markets want majority content, which is why they get more money. Let's opt into the best case of opposition. Let's say the majorities don't want a lot of content from minorities. This is exactly why this content becomes a lot more sensationalized. Racist people call you out for it. They deny whatever you have written because they feel like this is going against the colonial writings that are already out there because it makes them look like bad people. When these people fight back, you get a lot more attraction. This means you are invited to more talks, you have more podcasts, more interviews, you're able to spread the word in general even if your book doesn't become more famous. There is just a lot more opt-in by majorities because they're able to talk about it and hopefully at least some minds are being changed. Moving on to opening opposition then. First thing they say is that there is a lack of observer perspective. I don't see why this is true. Two things on majorities. Number one, they have the incentive of brainwashing and making their image look better. But second, they have the capacity to do so because they have accumulated a lot of resources, which means they have a lot of money, but not just that, they have the free time to just sit down and write books on an everyday basis. Second thing opening opposition says is that people are averse to suffering. The problem is on our side, we explain to you why minorities definitely read your stuff because they gain strength from this, they gain inspiration.
All three houses in this debate characterize things that are external to the actor and are equally speculative, and there is a deadlock. We at CG characterize the thing that is much more certain and proximate, which is community. If you are a writer who's grown up and has perceptively and psychologically seen the harms of being a minority in a state and grown up with the harms of facing things that you can perceptually relate to, but then also have inspiration of people within your own community that you grow up and look towards and have seen them face harms, but then also have obligations to give back to this community. I think this is a much more proximate incentive analysis of this actor because this comes rather internally, and this is how we win this debate. I want to then prove that why on the comparative at OpBench, the observer threshold is much worse. This takes out both of the data that come from both opening and closing opposition. One, I think the threshold is just much more lower for what you deem is friendly content for an observer. This means that if opening opposition says that the perception is likely going to be broad, I think that I'm unsure as to why this is true. Because we prove that why there's likely going to be much more cross-pollination of ideas within minorities when you make victim-centric content. This is true for multiple reasons, and this is a response to what we tell you the opening opposition into why there's obviously going to be nuance and it's not just going to be outrightly gory stuff. Why? It's true for multiple reasons. Most minorities deal with harms in different ways, but all that's common is the common oppressor, or probably the harm that you face against the state, or probably the police. This means that you're probably likely going to collectivize against the same ideas. So I'm unsure as to why this is likely going to be broad and good on their side, but then on our side, even if it's extremely narrow and gory, you still collectivize on the same harms that you face against the same oppressor, and you still collectivize against the same harms you face against the same colonizer or the state or whatever that is. But then this means that there's likely going to be extremely surface level. If they assume that the market is going to be saturated on our side and on their side the market is better, assume that there's unsure that your script is likely going to be picked up because you're going into a newer market. If the observer market is somehow better on their side, they need to prove that why you cross the threshold of what is going to be picked up in your script, because writers want something more nuanced, writers want something much more impeccable and much more catchy. This means that this beats the benefit that they get from writing stuff that is extremely broad and leads to larger opt-in. But then also you decrease opt-in on their side because one, when stuff is extremely broad and surface level, you have lesser interaction with it because the themes are simply broad and same, because you are unsure as to what is the tangible point of data that you get when you're reading this piece. This is not seen as thought-provoking, it's seen as a common commentary on a social issue and stuff like that. There is a burden on both benches to prove that why when you opt into writing that is much more broad and easily accessible and then serves to multiple minorities at the same time, you're not likely going to get the discourse that they claim, that is apparently in-depth discourse when you talk about more broader issues at a surface level. If that is true, then the nuance on their side, on our side, is much better, because note how they engage with us. It's extremely uncharitable. Victim-centric writing is not just gory writing, it's writing that talks about the in-depth issues and systematic harms that you face. You're much likely going to collectivize as multiple minorities on these issues because you probably idolize the fact that we have faced the same harm. This means that solidarity is much more better, but this is also because it's not simply gory, it's actual in-depth analysis. You spend time with these communities, you spend time with these victims, and this is better. Note, on two ways you can credit this response to closing comment. One, because it's contingent on much more proximate analysis of the actors, which is you having a proximate incentive, but then secondly, secondly, this deals with their best case, and this is a better response that comes from that comes from opening government, because opening government response to this is just simply saying that, oh, gory is good. But we prove that why it's just simply not gory, but we also prove that why broad and like extremely accessible stuff is also bad. But then lastly, why I want to flip the fact that why when you get better writing on our side, it's simply just much more transcendental. And this also beats their flip on the idea of that what the trade-off actually is. If on their side, you probably maybe have better broad and easier readability of the content, and you probably lock into like multiple allies. I'm unsure to why these allies don't transfer. Insofar as you probably collectivize on multiple lengths of the issues that you face, you're much more likely to get these allies anyways, because you probably understand that you probably have multiple harms that transcend the interdimensional harms that you face as a minority. You're probably likely to get picked up by multiple writers because one, this is much more in-depth and the victim-centric nature, but also the trickle-down is much more larger on scale, because at a point of time you probably engage in victim interviews, or you probably have analysis of what this community has faced. You probably give platform to them. You probably have interviews that are written in your book towards these minorities, and that is simply much more larger benefit on scale, because even if you probably don't get picked up as a writer, you probably don't get monetary incentives as either of the top halves claim, you probably at least get the benefit back to your community, which you care about so much more. This means that on scale, this is much more a better harm. Before I go on, POI.
Closing this line, the defining characteristic of the actor is a writer. Even if it's not your job, you probably want to do it enough to want some form of return. You also depict struggles on both sides, not the POV of a colonizer.
The point at which you say that money is an incentive, you need to prove that why materially this actor actually wants to care about this. So the analysis on top half is simply about why money is more important, but not that why this actor cares about this money uniquely or only or against other incentives. There's exclusive analysis that closing up, which tell you that even if this writer has come up from a community that probably has faced some harm, I think this simply is much more proximate and a much more internal push, because you've probably seen the harms that you grew up in. This means that even if you get less money, you're okay with that trade-off insofar as you want to not take the trade-off of doing not good enough to put out the harms that other minorities have faced. This means that simply on the idea of you having psychological and inspirational growth within your community, and when you face these harms, it's just simply much more important to you at best. Now I want to deal with what closing option has to say. Closing option has one extension, which is on the idea of escapability. I'm unsure as to why this is important in this debate, insofar as escapism is not a priori good. I would assert if you want to do good to your community, you probably want to not escape this idea, but probably want to be much more in depth with it and much more connected towards it. This proves the push on our side, which proves that why this community is likely going to be prioritized. This means that on the clash of catharsis, we prove this catharsis better actualized when you're much more connected to the idea of what you're writing. This doesn't happen on their side, because you cannot just have multiple bonds of connection with multiple minorities when you want to make content that is simply just broad and better and accessible to all. But on the flip of it, we prove that by this connection and catharsis becomes better, because you have spent time in writing about the minorities and taking victim interviews and putting out these realities, because this means that this catharsis is one, much more optically visible to you, but then secondly, you also see the people who read these kind of stuff, read this kind of writing, and then feel cathartic towards it. This catharsis compounds over time, but on their side, it's dismissed because this is one, easily accessible and broad, and probably focus on more opt-in rather than deeper opt-in. And I think that on that clash, we prove that catharsis becomes much better on our side, one, on visually engaging with it, but then secondly, how this compounds with multiple viewers. What have we proven in closing government, and why is this debate winning? One, we break the deadlock on top half on characterization of monetary incentive, but prove an incentive that's much more proximate. But then secondly, we deal with the best case of opposition in terms of observer content, which we prove and flip that by its observer content, one, is likely going to be not better on our side, but on the flip of it is better on our side, because one, it doesn't rely on opting into multiple people, but the single opt-in leads to the same benefits on their side.
Next debate, I call